Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Chasing Shadows, a podcast from the Austin Stone Community Church that hopes to serve as a supplement and a support to our current Ecclesiastes sermon series. I'm Ross Lester. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Val Hamilton. And in a shocking turn of events, we've managed to get Halem Sir back on the show. Some said that it couldn't be
That's
done.
Right.
You promised me fried chicken afterwards.
I promised you fried chicken. I'll deliver on that promise. But some told me you would never return, that you are locked away in your study and that it only locks from the inside, that we could never access your wisdom again. And yet here you are.
Yes.
Fried chicken is the key.
Fried chicken.
That's the key that opens the door.
Everything done. Halem, thank you for being here, brother. Jokes aside, days after preaching, especially hard-hitting message like the one that you delivered yesterday. It's actually Monday when we record these shows, even though they go out on a Thursday. It's Monday as we record these. And those are notoriously not easy days for preachers. And a lot of times people don't actually realize that or understand that. But once you just talk about a little bit about the energy dip and the emotional dip that can happen when you're kind of being before God's people on a Sunday, pouring it all out, and then Sunday afternoon, Monday can sometimes be our lowest days.
Yeah. I actually don't do a lot of evaluating, assessing of the preaching.
Yeah.
It's preached, it's done. I can't change it. I'm a good Calvinist in that way.
That's good.
I do try to spend some intentional time assessing the preacher, just I don't want to having preached the word be a hypocrite, preacher of the word, but not a doer of the word. And so just assessing if these things are being applied in my life, praying and thanking God that for the work that he did and that he would bear much fruit in our church. There's so much desperate prayers during the preaching sermon prepping week, but then after you preach, it's almost like you tend to just kind of forget and be done. And so just try to make it a habit of going back to God and being like, thank you for the work that you did, and answering prayers and being faithful, and try to sleep in.
I was going to say,
try to sleep
on
in.
top of all that godliness, how long do you sleep after?
But you can't. I can never, because I'm an early riser wife and 4 kids that for some reason love to use our bathroom. So I can't.
They just have to come in there.
I can't sleep in. Try to eat good,
Fried chicken,
and not healthy, not good in that way.
Okay,
something
what
delicious.
is like? I remember after I would teach, I would go just get a hankering for Taco Bell, and that is gross and terrible. But what's your kind of like? I'm gonna
My
get this.
go-to dirty is Jack in the Box.
Jack in the Box,
just
those
lots
monster
of
tacos.
Nostalgia to that.
Wow.
Some
I just
potato
eat
wedges.
salads.
Oh gosh,
crunches.
Brussels sprouts, do crunches, light jump roping.
It's how I punish myself. It's how I punish myself for my bad performance.
But you're able to grace us with your beauty.
That's right.
That's right. That's how you get this form from all those salads and crunches. Yeah, it's a strange thing because preaching is performative in a way, right? I mean, it's why there's a stage, there's a pulpit, you're in front of people, people's attention are on you. And that has a very peculiar energy draw to it that I used to be able to tolerate a lot more, but as I've got older, I find that preaching reps have like a longer tail. It takes a while to recover. Yeah. I feel that too.
Yeah, well, I really appreciated the message that you gave yesterday, Halem. I thought just the topic of money can be something that I think can be an uncomfortable one. And I really loved how you spent time really going into how often Jesus talks about money throughout the scriptures, and probably way more than we're comfortable with. But can you just share a little bit about why it's such an important topic for us to pay attention to and focus on, and not tune out whenever sermons like this come up?
Yeah, I think it's because God is real and he is zealous over his people, and he knows that it's in him and him alone that we'll find our full satisfaction and joy. And the great indictment upon us is that we exchange them. We exchange the glory of God for all sorts of other things. And I think the particular danger above any other thing perhaps in this world that money is doing is that it is the medium of exchange. It's like the epitome of the false god. It's saying, you don't necessarily have to worship me, just exchange me away for whatever you want to worship, And so if it's true that the heart is an idol factory, money says, take me to the market and you can get whatever you want, you know? And so I think because of that, the Bible narrows in on the danger that specifically money is.
I can remember years ago reading Richard Foster, and he was the first one I read. I don't think he was the first one to come up with the concept, but he was the first one I read who spoke of money as one of the principalities and powers, actually, that it's got this own power to be able to kind of grab hold of souls, right, through false worship and through a love of it rather than a love of God. And so it's unsurprising, really, that the scriptures would then say if it's such an ubiquitous thing, right, it's everywhere, and if it has this kind of spiritual power behind it as the medium of exchange, no wonder, you know, the most gracious person who ever lived, our Lord, spoke about it more than any other single topic, I believe. And that's very kind of him because you realize the hold that this would have over our lives. It's uncomfortable, though, in church, though, isn't it? Because I think you and I, Holem, we've grown up watching a lot of church traditions, and Val, you would have seen a lot of this as well in the history of the stone, where some churches talk about this too much. I'm not sure that it's too much, but maybe it's too flippantly. They speak of it as a means of exchange for righteousness, right? Which is kind of flipping this idolatry back towards another kind of idolatry, which is a health and wealth and prosperity thing. And so how do you feel as a preacher speaking about these topics? Because I think we've probably not spoken about it enough, but it's in response to others who have spoken about it too much.
Right. I think a part of it is if we're going to preach God's word rightly, and we have to talk about the things that the Bible talks about a lot. I think what's so amazing about Jesus is he spoke about money all the time, but he didn't get rich off of it, you know? And so the great danger in preachers talking about money all the time is if it's clearly enriching them. And so how do we not preach about money as much as Jesus did, but in the way that he did,
That's good.
and not enriching self, but in hopes that our people would be enriched in heaven because of it.
That's right. It makes me think of what you were saying, Ross, a couple of weeks ago when you were talking about considering how you come to church and the things. And just to really, I think sometimes it can feel like whatever we're talking about in a sermon is just a topic, like, oh, this will be a fun thing to hear about this week, versus God trying to persevere you in your faith and keep you from the world and untangle you from something that could actually bring you harm and take control of your heart in ways that you might not even understand. And I think that's sometimes such a really good just way to come in and say, this sermon isn't just an idea. It's not just a fun thing that Ross decided to talk about or Holem decided, that God is actually giving me something I need for my faith.
As you said, there's such a peculiar danger, right? It gets picked out by Jesus where he says you can't love God and money. Right? He doesn't say that for other things. He picks that one out particularly and says, this is where you're going to be tempted to think, I can get away with the duality of love in this area.
Right.
And he's like, and you can't.
Yeah.
You can't. Yeah, and we should take him at his word. You outlined the sermon brilliantly by saying that money demands love and it tells lies. That's more of this principality and power kind of language again. It's actually speaking. It's telling us something, but what it's saying is lies. But you said at the end that there's a life that actually sets us free from that love of money and from the lies that it tells. So what are some of those demands that money makes, and what are some of the lies that we're prone to believe?
You know, I think about the garden and Adam and Eve's interchange with Satan. And in some ways, you look at that interchange and you're like, where's the demand? You know, it's not like Satan is demanding that Adam and Eve take of the fruit and eat it. But yet, in his heart and his motivation, you do know that he is going after them with that kind of force and energy, with demand. But the way that he demands is through lies. By telling lies, he actually tempts them towards the demand that he's making subtly, but very forcefully, you know? And so I think money does demand our hearts, our love, our everything. That is the energy and the force with which it's coming after us. But the way that he does it is very crafty. Like Satan did it, because Satan's doing it through money. And the craftiness is through all the lies that it tells, that, through spending it, we could be beautiful. Through saving it, we could be safe. And therefore, more of it is always better. And it will never leave you and forsake you. It will always be there for you. And these are the lies that we're so tempted to believe and fall under the demands without even knowing it.
Yeah. You saying the particular lie of money making this promise, because there's so much it can provide for you throughout your whole life. But on that last day, you kind of realize it's been a facade the whole time, because it actually can't save you from death. It can't deliver you from what the end of your life actually brings. And in some ways, like, we're all equal, whether you have a lot of money or a little money, but it's made this promise to you this whole time, and it just kind of is revealed. And I just remember thinking, I know that's true, and I wonder how different I would live if I really believed it, right? Because it feels like if you just have money, you can be more generous, or you can be more secure. You can spend it on all the things that you want. But I think for me, it felt like, this is one of those, maybe the most concrete litmus test for, am I focused on life under the sun or beyond it? How I handle money. Maybe that's why Jesus talked about it so much, was that it is kind of one of the most tangible ways to examine yourself.
I didn't get a chance to get into in the sermon, but one of the things that it's pointed out in Ecclesiastes, it says, this is a grievous evil, that he lost all these riches in a bad venture, but that this is another grievous evil, that he lost the gain for all of his toiling. And so I think another theologian I was reading said this is the great miscarriage of life. Now, here's this thing that you loved, and so you lost it. That's a grievous evil. But the other grievous evil is you lost the whole point of living. The labor of your life is lost now. And so it took you your whole life to gain that thing that you loved. But at death, not only did you lose it, but you lost the whole labor of your life.
It revealed that it was never what it made its promise to be. That's good.
So there's a danger in this text, and even in a discussion like this, there's the danger of some privilege bringing in a blindness, right? And so I could read Ecclesiastes and go, easy for you to say, Solomon. You had lots of money. And so it's easy for a rich person to come and go like, hey, it's meaningless, guys. Don't follow this path.
Right.
And you're like, well, I want to try. Let me give it a bash. What would we say pastorally to many in our congregation for whom cost of living is just eating their lunch and their dinner, right? Who credit card debt, but not on extravagant things, but just on survival, has racked up and stacked up, and who are sitting through this message, reading this text, just kind of crushed by their financial position, not from having too much, but from in their kind of circumstances feeling like they don't have enough to be able to provide for themselves and their families. Pastorally, what would we say to them from kind of the same text and same posture?
I think the fight that the Bible offers us to fight is the fight of contentment, radical contentment. And I think whereas the human bent would be, if I could just get this much, then I'll be content. So there's two ways to fight for contentment. Actually go after that thing and get it and hope that there's going to be contentment on the other side, which somebody like Solomon is saying, no, there wasn't. It was always more and more and more. The other way to fight for contentment is actually lower our desire for the things in this world. And so, where Paul takes it is, if you have food, if you have clothing, with this you shall be content. And when you look at the life of Jesus, this was what he found contentment in. And contentment, I think a lot of times, we try to view it as, okay, fine, I'll be okay, But I think the biblical picture of contentment that Jesus displayed is just great joy, great enjoyment and satisfaction and all the gifts of God that he was daily providing in his life. And so what was it about Jesus' eating and enjoyment of daily bread that made people look at him and go, oh, this guy's a glutton? He must have been enjoying food like crazy, and he must have been saying thank you to God for his every meal, to the point where people were like, this guy's really into food, but I think it's showing us that what he found contentment and delight and joy in was in not the big things in this world that we all try to attain for, but even the smallest everyday things that God provides.
It's really good.
That's so good, Halam. I remember when my husband and I very first got married, and we had a little bit of debt coming into our marriage. And I remember feeling this sense of almost like this boot on us because we couldn't be as generous as we wanted to be. And even you saying, what do you say to people who might be feeling that? I think there was for us this moment where you can worship God or worship money as a God when it's giving you a lot, but also when it feels like it's withholding from you and demanding. And I just remember every season has felt like a temptation to, we got out of debt, but we still were kind of living just day to day. We weren't able, and then we added kids to the mix. And then we always felt this like temptation to postpone what you said, which was that radical giving, that generosity. And I loved what you said that the love of money can hide in our spending, it can hide in our saving, but it cannot hide in our giving. And I loved that because for us, that was one of those lessons from that season where we were like, there's some way to be radical in our giving with the means that we have, even if that means looks different today than it might look in 5 years. But it's such a temptation to just kick it down the road and wait for that season where giving is easy. But I think in some ways it's always sacrificial, no matter, what the circumstance is. And so I feel that. Like
that's the beauty of God actually not needing our money.
Right.
When Jesus is looking at the temple and pointing out the giving that's going on, if he actually needed money, he would point to the people putting in large sums and say, look at this giving, guys.
Right.
That's radical giving.
Right.
But because he doesn't need the money, he just desires our hearts. Here's a woman who puts 2 copper coins in and says, look at this giving. It's the percentage of the heart,
That's right.
that's enraptured by who God is and his beauty and his worth. And so in so many ways, you could give large sums of money and yet not be pleasing to God, or small amounts, but that's tied to the whole of your heart that makes him so happy.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. You spoke a little bit, and we've covered it a bit, of like growing in contentment, growing in generosity. I think one of the things we've hoped to do through this podcast is to humanize the pulpit a little bit. And so do you mind maybe both of you sharing a little bit about how you've had to grow in generosity, how you've wrestled in your own life with both contentment and generosity as you've grown through these life stages?
Yeah, I mean, I think even going back to those different seasons of being newly married and kind of facing some of the ghosts of our spending past, and trying to work through those, and then adding kids. I think for us, we've had to say money is a tool for us to be faithful to God. And when we've had like this present season in particular, we're trying to make decisions on our kids are going to be out of daycare and into school, and we're thinking about what schools do we consider for our kids. And it used to just, money wouldn't even be a part of that decision. And we're kind of realizing, that might impact our generosity. And what is saying yes to some of the decisions about our school and our kids and our upbringing and the vacations, just bringing the topic of money and a consideration of, and how generous can we be? I mean, those are some of the conversations just that we are having on the way home from your sermon. That, it's a good sermon when like a husband and wife are just immediately fighting in the car. It's a good one. Like, okay, I think it's this. I think that's how it is. But we were genuinely thinking, okay, there's things we want to do. There's things we'd love to do. There's things we've been waiting to do. And now with the spirit of contentment and giving in our minds, who do we want to be? What's the legacy we want to have? And so it's just changed some of the conversations that we're having and the decisions that we're making, and adding a dimension of faithful in our finances that we haven't had. Yeah.
One way I try to fight for contentment is, we're always in the kitchen at the dining room table, hanging out, eating, and there's this crack in the wall and there's chips in the painting, in the cabinets, and there's scratches on the floors because at some point I lost my mind and got a dog. It was a prelude to the stroke. I should have known. That should have been the danger sign. And I'm just so discontent. I'm just like, I wish all this could be clean and fixed, and And we were at another time trying to figure out, like, being grown-ups and hanging some art on the walls and things like that. And so we bought a few, and one of them, we returned all of them, but one of them I wanted us to keep because the picture of it, for some reason, as I was looking at it, it seemed like a kingdom in the background. And there's all this forest and you can kind of barely see it. But to me, it was kind of like a kingdom in the background. It reminded me of the verse, here we have no lasting city, but we wait for a city that is to come. And we hung it in the kitchen because I was like, anytime I see the cracks and the scratches and all these things, I just want to look at this picture and be like, this is not our city. We're waiting for a city that is to come. So that's kind of one practical way I try to fight for contentment. In giving, probably a lot of our listeners know, our church is in the middle of Able giving campaign, and we decided that the leaders ought to go first in our committing. And so even before the rest of our church got a chance to think about it and pray about it, us elders got to do that. And of course, this church has blessed us, me, our family, just so much. And we thank God for it. We want to give radically, but at the same time, it's not like we're sitting on all this savings that, here you go, only money that I could look at and say we could give this is like money we saved for our kids' college, and that was deep wrestling that I hesitate to share because, when we give, we're not supposed to let our left hand know what our right hand is doing. But at the same time, to let our church know, like we're with you, we're not just asking you guys to radically give, but while we don't do anything. And, but what encouraged me to do it is, I remember growing up, my dad's pastor and growing up poor, and him just sitting me down one day and just being like, hey, if you want to go to college, then you have to figure it out. We don't have any money. And so by God's grace, all of that was able to be taken care of. And when I think back, my dad doesn't credit himself for providing for my college tuition. And I don't credit myself. We both look at God and say, look how gracious God was. I think what I desperately wanted was my kids to not have that kind of stress and pain and pressure. And for me to be like, look at what a good provider I am. But if we would have done what we hoped to do, looking back, our kids would have been like, I'm so thankful that my parents paid for our colleges and given us credit. I think I would have looked at myself and said, what a good provider I am. Good job, and so, hey, this is a future decision we wouldn't have ever made. But if we make it, and if, Lord willing, our kids go to college and it happens, then only person that would get credit and get glorified is God. And so these are hard decisions, but I think in faith we're able to make them in a way that gives glory to God.
I mean, ultimately, for generosity to actually be generosity, it has to be sacrificial, right? It has to come at the cost of something else. And I think the lie that Sue and I have believed so often is, we'd like to give big for God, but we'd like to somehow that would please him in a season where it's less sacrificial.
Right.
When what he wants is actually us displaying our faith in showing, I believe this is all yours. And so to give it back to you, it's all yours anyway.
Right.
But to do that when it's sacrificial, not thinking you can get to a point where you could scratch a big check, even if that's not sacrificial, well, that's not going to please God, and it's not going to have shown his mercy on display through you anyway. And so why wait? So that's humbling and helpful. So thank you, brother. Thanks for coming in on a Monday.
Thanks for doing it every week.
It's been our joy. We've enjoyed it very, very much.
Absolutely.
The Lord's been very kind through it. So that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Chasing Shadows. This coming Sunday, we're going to be doing a follow-on sermon from Ecclesiastes 5:18 to 6:12, where we're going to actually talk about this generosity and contentment. There's going to be some hints in the text as to how you actually live this out practically and how you embrace this as a lifestyle and as a view of stewardship and what God gives you and how you can give back. I hope and pray that you'd be able to join us at one of our services. Otherwise, you can email us any of your questions or comments at podcasts@oceanstone.org. We hope to see you next week.